want to talk about how I make an abstract painting. This will be, I think I'm going to have a little series of like step-by-step, so this will be in the instructional and in the art process playlists. But yeah, I want to kind of go through what my process is when I make an abstract piece. I've got some examples we'll look at here. This first one is going to be more just like the planning and just like, I guess an overview, just talking about what I would do. And then I'll have another video that goes through the actual painting of it and show that as well. Again, as part of this like instructional thing, I'll like slow down and kind of maybe talk about what I'm doing. Maybe, we'll see. But for this one, it's just an overview of the steps that I would take to make an abstract piece, the steps I do take. The most important thing, I think, is to break it down into elements. I guess, let's backtrack a second. Abstract meaning non-objective, non-figurative work. So if you've taken an art class from me before or something, then you probably are really familiar with this already. And it's like, yeah, in abstract, there's no figures, there's no people, there's no dogs, there's no objects. So non-objective or non-figurative is another way to say abstract. It's not like taking someone, like, oh, I'm going to do a portrait, but I'm going to mess it up a bunch and make it weird. That's still a face. As long as you can see, like, oh yeah, it's a face, but it's real messed up, or like a cubist thing. I mean, then it would be cubist, but I mean, so taking an object and then trying to like screw it up a bunch, or like a weird like landscape and try to mess it up a bunch, and you can still see it's a landscape, it's still a landscape. That not a purely abstract piece. Sometimes even I've been guilty of using the term like, oh, this is an abstract landscape, because people understand that better, because they're like, that's not a landscape, and then I know that it's not an abstract piece, so I'm like, it's an abstract landscape, and they're like, oh, I see it now. But for our purposes, we're going purely abstract, non-objective, non-figurative. There's nothing in there that you can point at and be like, oh yeah, like that's a tree. So getting that out of the way, that's what we're talking about. 3 things to really, really focus on when you create an abstract piece is color, texture, and composition. So another way of saying composition could be balance, the composition of the overall piece, how things are balanced. I'm not going to get too heavy into elements and principles of design, but all of those things add into your composition. So if we're talking about balance, then it's like, hey, are my textures balanced? Are my colors balanced? The contrasts of things, are they balanced? If I'm using line, is my line kind of creating a unified composition? Is it creating like balance? Is it too heavy in one area? What should I do to like soften that up or make the other area heavier, whatever? So we're going to go in more detail into that. But yeah, color, texture, composition, those are those 3 things that you would use to make up an abstract piece, at least the kind that I make. And I've made a lot. So obviously I have a very different style than some other people might, and they make abstracts in a completely different way than I do, and they look very different as well. When I make the piece eventually that I'm going to make, I have no idea what I'm doing yet, by the way, but also the mediums that I tend to use, mostly acrylic. Sometimes I use ink, spray paint, nail polish, sometimes drawing materials like oil pastels and stuff, but a lot of it is going to be acrylic, or depending on my mood, sometimes they're almost like full spray paint pieces. I think for this one I'm going to try to stick to acrylic, because I think that's what most people would use and have accessible to them. I have tried dabbling with oils and stuff, but that's a story for another day. So yeah, those 3 things, I'm going to say it again for the 3rd time: color, texture, composition. That's what we would focus on for an abstract piece. With an abstract piece, it lends itself to, I mean, just like any other art piece, like, oh, it could be purely design, maybe, or it could be really meaningful. I think more in the past couple of years, my work is straddling the line of those things, and I definitely make more design than I used to. When I started creating abstract pieces, they were very personal, very meaningful, conceptual. So, like I said, there's just a shift in my work lately that I'm okay with doing more design work. And when I mean design work, I mean that there's no concept really attached, or not a strong concept. There's not a lot of meaningful meaning, I guess, attached to the piece. So the one that I'm going to make, I actually don't know yet. Like I said, I haven't really gotten that far as to like, oh, when I get through this video and like I'm going to do this instructional thing step by step, how to make an abstract. I'm not sure exactly if I'm going to do something more design based or if I'm actually going to be doing something more conceptual. But abstracts really work well as design pieces as well, because then you're not worried about like, oh, if this is going to go up in a dentist's office or something. Like, people see a lot of boring abstracts that way, I feel. So you might have a different idea of what an abstract is or could be because of what you've seen, and maybe you've seen them in a more professional setting, and then they're pretty palatable for a general audience to take in, because there's no concepts attached to them generally, or strong ones that people might disagree with or whatever. So if you're going to do something conceptual, then we need to kind of talk about how to give a piece meaning. But I'm going to skip around and jump around a little bit. So we'll talk about that in a bit. So I mentioned those three key things to keep in mind. I guess I'm saying it more than 3 times. Color, texture, composition. Those are these elements making up an abstract piece. But since we're going to go step by step, I generally think of abstract pieces in 3 steps, sometimes 4, from beginning to end, and that first part is planning. Now, for me, I feel like 50% of the process for me is up here, of any painting or any art piece. If not more than 50%, it's conceptual. It's up here. I'm thinking about it. I was influenced by something, and then my thoughts about that thing, whether it's a movie or a poem or an experience in my life or something like that, I'm thinking about it. I'm just it's going around. Like, I'm not planning in a traditional sense. And again, some people that may have had art classes by me or by other teachers, I usually mean something different with planning than other teachers might mean. If you're talking about, if we're talking about like high school art and curriculum and stuff, and there's a planning process you have to do, and I've done a little bit of that, but some teachers definitely do way more, and it's more intensive. So the planning that I'm talking about is mostly mental planning. So what are you going to make? Why are you making it? That's the kind of planning I mean. So I usually don't just roll up into the studio and be like, oh, I feel like making an abstract today, and, all right, let's get started. Like, how would I get started? Where do I start? How do I know? How do I know what textures I want? How do I know what colors I want? Well, the composition kind of goes into the process of when you're creating it a little bit, but how do I know any of that stuff if I don't know why I'm making the piece? So let's say I just felt like doing some design work, then my planning is just like, sometimes I've just had a color palette in my head and I feel like, wow, I really want to make something with like mint greens and like pink and yellow and just these pastel colors, and like for some reason I've got that color palette in my head. It's so fresh, like I think that would be sick. Let's make that. And that's all my planning is. Or sometimes, like I said, I've been influenced by, there's plenty of times like on Instagram, like earlier, I don't have the piece anymore, but I mean earlier on, well, maybe I can't insert it. But I was influenced by just like a selfie somebody took, and I was like, wow, like it was just like a bathroom mirror selfie, but what they were wearing, it was like pink and teal, and they were like pale skin and had black hair, and I was just like, wow, like for some reason, like that color combination, just like especially with the pink and the teal, I was like, wow, that's amazing. I want to use that color palette, and I put that into like more abstract painting, and yeah, so maybe I'll insert that here. I'll ask them for permission to see if I can do that. Anyway, yeah. So the inspiration for design work could come from anywhere. So that's an example. I'll put that's an example of the painting that was more design based. I'll put some more examples in here of like design based abstracts that I've made. And some of these kind of straddle the line of um, conceptual or with meaning, and just being design based. So one of them is Witch House. Um, it was when I first got into the genre of music, Witch House, and I was like, wow, I love this. And I was like, I really want to paint to this. It'd be super good for painting. And so I did, and I just made a piece called Witch House. But music is a huge part of my artistic practice in general, and sometimes though there's a lot of meaning in a piece, and then I usually title a piece like song lyrics or song titles or an album name or a band name or whatever, and it gives a little insight into the meaning of that piece, and it can be a very strong meaning. That was a case like that design piece was purely just like, hey, I'm just listening to Witch House, and this is kind of how I was visually interpreting what I was listening to. But yeah, there's some other design pieces there of just like, oh, I just really want to work with these colors. I think that'd be super cool. So that first stage, planning, that's what we're talking about. So if I was going to do something design based, I would that's just my thought process of like, oh, I just feel like doing something a little lighter, fluffier maybe, and just like wanting to play with these colors. Sometimes design or abstracts work really well to talk about like about art is what I call it sometimes. So sometimes it's just, yeah, I want to play with a certain color palette. I really want to push this one. How many different reds can I get, or something like that, in a red piece, or I don't know. If I'm going to be planning something more conceptual or meaningful, then again, it's just like this is all very informal. So like when I'm talking about planning, for me, it's very informal. But I'm something sparks an idea against something I've read or a movie I saw or an experience I had or how I've interpreted something, and then I think, wow, like I get a lot of I've been rewatching Hannibal lately, which is just the most beautiful show ever. It's pure art. It's amazing in every aspect, the style, the music. Anyway, so I've been getting a lot of quotes from there, and that's been inspiring. Like, wow, just like this one quote. Like, I know the context of it, but it's out of context. It's just a beautiful line. And then that inspires me to think about, like, yeah, I think I want to make a painting with that quote. I really want to visualize and visually express these words. And then usually that might end up being a title as well. But that's kind of where the planning starts to come into my mind. Of just like, I get inspiration from something in my life that's happened, that I've witnessed, I've seen, been a part of, done, whatever. And then I start to think around that, like, okay, so part of this, I'm just like, wow, that's a beautiful line. And then I'm like, what? And then sometimes I just see colors, or I just see kind of a painting a little bit. I don't visualize very well, actually, traditionally with some other people who they can just draw from their head, because, like, I can't really do that when it comes to, like, oh, I can see, like, a dragon in my head. Like, it's really hard for me to even have a mind's eye when it comes to some things. But yeah, there's inspiration from somewhere, and then I start thinking, like of colors or something sometimes, and then I try to stop, actually, because if I'm not in the studio at that point, if I can't just go and make it right away, I'm just like, okay, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Like, I just want to stop what I'm doing right there, and just like, I don't want to go off the rails and like think about all these amazing ideas, but I can't execute them right now. So that first step of planning. I get an idea, and then usually it goes into thinking of colors right away. So which is one of those three major things that make up an abstract piece. Even if the colors are just like black and white, then I mean, you're using those purposefully. I mean, everything when we're talking about art, I would like to say is purposeful. I mean, we go on the Bob Ross route and be like, happy little accidents, and those happen in the process. But before we get to the process, we want to be as purposeful with our choices as possible. So, when I start my planning, I'm thinking of colors. So I think like, yeah, these colors would be super cool. I want to make a piece with these colors. These colors work well together. Is usually what happens. I like spread out a bunch of like if once I get into the studio, I just spread out a bunch of paint tubes basically, and I'm like, hey, these are, or if it's spray paint I'm working with or whatever, I'm like, hey, I talked to, like, I really saw like a lot of red and purple, let's say. And then sometimes like that's not going to be enough though. What else goes with those colors that's going to help me in whatever I'm trying to express here? which again, I'm going to make a separate video where I actually make an abstract painting and kind of slow things down step by step and kind of talk about what my process is in that moment. And this is just the overview of how everything would go from start to finish, in a broad overview of it. So I would start getting those out and then be like, what else goes with this? What else goes with this color? Sometimes I just have maybe 3 or 4 or something like shades, and that's all I need. And then other times I'm like, oh, but I need this and this and this. And then I find I have all the colors, all of the colors, all of the golden acrylics out, and I'm like, there's almost nothing left in the box. Like, this is gonna be a crazy painting. And sometimes I just take more out as I work, and sometimes I'm like, I actually don't need this. This is dumb. I thought like an idiot, and I need to put that back. But with the planning part, that's kind of where it goes. Is like, am I doing design? Am I doing something more conceptual? Whatever entered my mind, then it usually goes into color immediately. What colors am I thinking of? And yeah, that's kind of where the planning is. For, like I said, for me, there's like 3 or 4 stages to making an abstract piece, and that's just the mental planning that can happen. Other times it's a little more in depth, because it's like, oh, I was inspired by something, and then I was writing about it, and the writing ends up being not on purpose, but part of the planning, because the writing is also pushing me thinking about this concept more and exploring it more, or researching like a concept, and then wanting to somehow do that. So, I mean, sometimes, people do a lot of research in art sometimes, like traditional research too, which I don't like. But I mean, if they're studying a topic, I talked about how I'm going to be redoing this MK Ultra thing, and therefore I'm researching that. And writing notes and stuff like that, and that would go into a piece. So some people, depending on what you're doing, I mean, the planning portion might have some real research involved in many different forms. But I want to move on to texture. So if we go planning, texture, painting, and then maybe titling, but like I said, usually there's 3 stages for me, because a lot of the time the planning and the title are at the very beginning. Like, usually I know my title before I start a piece, because it's usually part of what inspired me to make the piece, is having done. So I've kind of thought about things, whatever, I go into the studio. Now I need to apply some texture. You can apply texture while you paint as well, but I mean, I like to use gesso as texture, and that takes some time to dry. So I'm going to show some stuff here in a bit and go more into depth. But if I'm using gesso and I want to put it on really thick in some spots, then I need to wait for it maybe 24 hours sometimes before I can come and paint on it. So that's why this is like a separate stage, is the planning and thinking about what I want, and then I need to apply texture. Sometimes I use other things for texture, but at the start, usually not. Usually it's just gesso. I mean, things that I've used in the past, or things that you could obviously use, whatever, right? There's 2 different kinds of texture too. There's physical texture and there's implied texture. I'm talking about physical texture right now, or real texture. So if you were to run your hand across the canvas, you could actually feel the difference. It's not all smooth, whereas implied texture is implied, that you, from a distance, you feel like some parts are smooth and some parts are softer or whatever, and some parts are more rough, but really it's all the same physically. I'm talking about physical or real texture though. So, things like coffee grounds, things like duct tape, I mean, you could just get anything from anywhere and somehow put that on or into your painting. So for me though, I mean, whatever I'm putting on there needs some adhesive usually. But I mean, like Laura Lee sometimes like sews into her canvas, just like sews. That's texture too. It's a different physical material with a different feel than the canvas itself or the paint would be. So that's another form of physical texture. So I like to prep my canvas first with that physical texture and let it dry. Again, I'll show you some examples in a bit here, or some paintings I have out right now. But that takes time. When I do that, I'm also thinking of the composition. So we've already talked a little bit about color. Like I said, the 3 elements to the abstracts that I'm talking about are color, texture, and composition. When I'm putting the texture down, I'm thinking about the composition a little bit. All I'm really trying to do is make sure that it's balanced, and being like, hey, if I put really thick stuff here, well, maybe I need a little bit up here and I need a little bit out there. Like, I don't follow the rule of thirds or any of that garbage. It just has to feel right, and that's one of those things that's really difficult to teach or explain to anybody, is like, what's balance, and like, how do you create balance? Because if you have something like in the center of your piece, it usually looks really weird and awkward, honestly, if something's like centered. So you need to find ways of creating balance without being so symmetrical sometimes, like really ultra symmetrical. Again, we'll talk about that when we look at these pieces and how, like, there's some finished pieces I have here that I'll talk about. A lot of my art right now is in Edmonton, so for Esper finished pieces, I don't have a lot of abstracts right now here, but I've got a couple we could look at, and I could post some pictures here as well just to highlight some things if need be. But texture, so that's the second stage of creating for me, is like trying to put my texture down and thinking about the composition. I'm not thinking at that point where I'm going to put colors or anything like that, so that's not even in my head. It's just looking at a white canvas, and then if I'm using gesso, then I'm using white gesso, and I'm like, okay, I've got really thick parts down on the bottom left. Maybe I need some, like, 3 like different areas of this gesso, but putting it on lighter or thinner in the top right. That kind of balances it out in the way, or maybe whatever. Like, so while I'm putting on this texture, then I'm thinking about the composition while I'm putting it on, just in the middle of doing it. And usually my texture, I'm not thinking about the concept a lot. Sometimes it's really important, and sometimes it's not. I add more texture in while I'm creating, and those are times inside the act of painting, which is the third stage, which for me is usually the final stage. If you've already created a title beforehand, or you've thought about a title beforehand, then I guess that would be your last stage as well. But in the process of painting, I definitely add more texture that's way more important to the painting. But this is this prep work that sometimes I'm like, yeah, I want these thick things to paint over. Whatever texture you put on there is going to be influencing how you paint. And that's a really key thing to mention that I can't believe I mentioned yet. With an abstract piece, which is, I guess it's the perfect time, because we're going to talk about painting right now, which is like the third stage of creating the abstract piece, that everything you do influences the next thing you could possibly do. Every mark you make influences the next mark you make. So even when I put down that texture, and it's dry and everything, that influences what I can do for painting on top of it, painting around it, highlighting it somehow, making it get lost in the piece. With an abstract, it's just so important that, like, it's very process-based, and everything you do, like, it influences the next thing you do. Balance and composition are so important with an abstract piece. And you balance things with the colors, you balance things with the textures. So, you could be using line in your, how you're distributing color could be a line, it could be a shape, even though I don't like shapes really in my abstract pieces, but, or I guess not geometric shapes, organic shapes maybe, but those are all super important in there. So, everything you do influences something else. You put some yellow here, now you got to think, eventually, am I going to put yellow over here? Is that going to work? Is that not going to work? Whatever. After a while, it's very, very intuitive. And maybe at the very beginning, it was really intuitive for me at the very beginning as well, I guess. It was just really natural to me. And I think about it more now than I probably did before, which sometimes isn't great, because I'm not making my work very raw and primal and in the moment as much as I was at the very beginning. Part of that is because I'm not making a lot of angry work right now, or not the same type of anger and not in the same fashion. So, the act of painting itself is going to be that third step. That's where all the fun is. You did some mental planning, you had a good idea, you maybe thought about some colors you want to use, but you're like, hey, I need to put down my texture because the next day I got to come in and paint it. Now we're painting it. We've chosen our colors. We're kind of like, picking them up and whatever. You can add more texture into that process too. Like, sometimes to resolve, like, one of these pieces I'm going to talk about, I had to resolve it by kind of adding some duct tape, which is a form of texture and color, to balance things out, because it was just weird. Sometimes, like I said, the texture is really, really important for adding to the mood of a piece, and I don't have anything right now that will show it, but there's times where I have I've like cut into, like I used to use a lot of masonite board, and I would cut into the masonite board just in the heat of the moment, and I mean that really added to the piece thematically. There's a piece that I have it at home. I didn't even think about it. That I usually use for teaching purposes to talk about how much planning can go into an abstract piece, and we break this piece down, and maybe I will add that into this series somewhere. The piece is called A Dance with Scarlet, a Self-Loathing Sonnet, so yeah, and maybe I'll bring that in. But we definitely talk about that and break down all the symbolism and stuff like that, and why all these choices were made. That was a rare piece for me, because every single choice I made was so purposeful. The cuts that I made into the masonite board, there was a certain number of them in a certain place because there's a symbol for whatever. I'm not going to go to it now. So yeah, got color, texture, composition as the three things we focus on. The stages, 3 or 4 of them, but I would focus on the 3. We do some mental planning, we apply texture, wait for it to dry, and then we do the painting. Again, 4th stage of making an abstract piece might be titling it, if you haven't titled it yet for some reason, if that isn't part of your concept. Some people just have a loose idea of what they want to do, and then they need to refine it with a title later. If you were creating meaning with an abstract piece, I think titles are very important. So to me, they can be very on the nose, and sometimes they can be more cryptic, and it's like, oh, if you know these song lyrics that I put in the title, maybe you'll get the meaning behind this abstract better. I think that a good abstract without any title at all will reflect the emotion or feeling that you put into it and that you want other people to get out of it. So some people, I mean, are famously just for putting untitled on abstract pieces, or it's like number 3028B7X or something, like just a nonsensical title, because the work can speak for itself. I think with abstract, I mean, with any great piece of art, the work can speak for itself without a title, I guess, right? Just like a song, you don't need a song title to know what the song's about. Like the lyrics inside the song, the musical composition and instrumentation, vocals if there are any, that can really help. But interestingly enough, like if there are no vocals in a song or no lyrics in a song, I find that titles become really important for instrumental tracks, because yes, they were trying to express something with just instruments, and it might get lost a little easier, which again, sometimes people want. And that's one of the great things about abstract pieces that some people love, is that one thing, you could just turn it any which way, and I mean, you could do that with any painting, like you could put a portrait upside down if you wanted to, but I mean, with an abstract, there's a way that I make them, that's generally the way people hang them. But you could just turn it sideways and be like, I like that, or turn it upside down, or whatever. But also, different people get different meanings out of it, and with some pieces, maybe they're real political, like a political cartoon or something, it's kind of like, this is what I want you to get, and that's it. And with an abstract piece, I'm just doing what I want and how I feel at the moment, and that usually translates similarly to someone viewing it, but there's times where someone might be getting something completely different out of it. Maybe because the colors I'm using, to me, are significant in a way that it's different for someone else. Like, maybe mint green for somebody, for some reason, they think of like a mental institution. Like, you know, because back in the day or whatever, like there's certain color palettes even with certain cultures and certain time periods that it's like, oh yeah, like this type of green, the walls are like this weird minty green, that was in like all these mental institutions and asylums and stuff for a while. And so maybe people think of that, where I'm just like, man, mint green's like a super nice, like chill, well, I guess that's maybe why they were in there, I don't know. But anyway, so different people just have different ways they interpret the work, which is beautiful about abstract pieces. But if I title it, I can guide the viewer's attention a little bit, and that's what I like to do. But it's also because I started off as a writer, writing poetry and prose and stuff, and I used to just write more. Before I created any visual art, I was writing for years, and I like words. So that's why I really carefully title my pieces, and I want to guide the viewer a bit. Sometimes, like I said, those titles are more cryptic, so you may not understand them if you don't know a certain reference, if you haven't read that poem, if you don't know that song, or whatever, or have seen that movie. then you have no reference at all for what the piece is, but you should still be able to get a feeling from the piece. Yeah, I think like that's kind of breaking things down a bit. I don't know how that sounded to you. I'm sure that I could have done a better job of making it uniform and step by step and very like meh, whatever. But I guess the other thing that I could say right now about abstracts is that I like to impress upon people, because the way that I like to make them, if you do them in one sitting, and I just mean the painting process, because like I said, if you're putting on some texture that takes time to dry, then it takes time to dry. Maybe like one day I'm like, oh, I get an idea, that's great, and then I can go into the studio that day if I'm lucky, and maybe put down some texture, and the next day I can paint it. I tend to do abstracts in one sitting, the painting portion. I think that's really important for the stuff that I make, because I am never going to be in the exact same mood again, is how I feel. I will never be in exactly the same mental, emotional state. And I mean, if it's design work, it's different. But even then, I'm not in the same place where I think something, like, the abstracts that I make are pretty physical sometimes, where I'm moving around sometimes very quickly. It's not a lot of planning on the visuals. It's like, yeah, thinking of colors and like, how can I balance these out, and how will this interact with that thing, and then fixing things as I go along or at the very end. But I try to be raw with it and just in the moment and make the piece. If it's really conceptual or meaningful or personal, then even more so is a reason to do it in one sitting, to really get everything out of what I'm feeling in that moment onto the canvas in that sitting. If I come back to it the next day, I most likely I'm not going to be in the exact same state of mind. So it can be really frustrating if I were to try to get back into the piece, because I feel like, oh, maybe I completed it 75%, and then I try to come back in, and I'm like, yeah, but now I'm not in the same place. It's weird. I don't like it. I don't know. Some people work with oil paints, and I mean, that's the other reason, I guess, to do an abstract in one sitting, or to think about it that way, is because I'm using mediums that dry a lot quicker. Spray paint and acrylics, they dry pretty quick, and that usually suits me pretty well. But that also means that you're working into the painting and not on top of the painting. So if you've got elements that are dry and then you come back to it later, and it's just, you can't mix back in. It's not wet anymore. There's another reason to do an abstract in one sitting, because I just tend to think it looks better when you can work into the painting, not on top of it. But some people, if you're using like oil paints or things like that, it could stay wet for days or weeks, depending on the ratio of oil you use to paint. So I know that a lot of full-time artists, professional artists, who use oil paints or even don't, they've got like tons of paintings around, and they're all half finished, and then they just like work on the ones that they're feeling in the mood to work on in that day. And that would be a great way to work. I'd like to explore that if I had a studio space that was better suited for that, and more time, and if I was using oils, which I'd like to do, because then I can see how a painting can change and shift over time. That's really important with any form of art, but abstracts too, is like being open to where the painting takes you. You come to it with an idea, you even got some colors, maybe a concept, something you want to do, but again, every mark you make change, like it informs the next thing you're going to do. So being open to change and being open to discovering new things in the process is so important. Your mood might shift while you make the piece too, which usually doesn't happen when I'm like really agitated or upset or frustrated or very much like emotional, I guess. It usually doesn't shift while I'm in the painting. I've got music going on though, accompanying my mood. I really want to, that's really key for me to stay in the same place, is to have a soundtrack that I've picked out. That's something that actually is part of the planning, and I should have put that in there. I didn't think of that, but part of my planning actually too is like, right before I start the painting process, is what music am I going to play? Music is super important in my work, so it really helps me stay in a certain spot emotionally, mentally, and that informs my movements, how I breathe, how I, with the brush strokes, the colors I'm using, like everything. It really helps me frame my work. It's super important, so that's something too. Anyway, I think that's all that I have to say about, you know, color, texture, composition. How do you use those three really important elements in an abstract painting? The stages, which for me, it could be 3 to 4, but generally planning the piece, applying the texture, doing the painting, and then titling it possibly if I hadn't done that yet. So I'm going to show you what I mean with some of these finished pieces here. So we'll look at some older stuff first. So this piece, which is titled, you know what, I forget. I think it starts off with The Great Misdirect, and the title is on the back here. Oh, Disease, Injury, Madness, The Great Misdirect, which is Between the Buried and Me reference, because that was what I was listening to when I created this thing. I love this piece. If it was on canvas, I'm sure it would have sold already, but it's harder to sell stuff on masonite board. So if we're talking about those elements, I mean, like, this has got a lot of color. I can tell you I used spray paint and acrylics on it. Again, I textured it first. So I had just been listening to Between the Buried and Me and listening to a specific album, and just was like, you know what, I just want to make a piece. Like, that's, for some reason, it was just like, because if you know the band and stuff, and especially that album, it's very like progressive in a certain way. It can be heavy, and then it's very sporadic at times and spastic. But I was just feeling like really bright colors, and again, like this kind of what I call Pepto-Bismol pink I had in my mind. Teal was definitely in my work a bunch. Anyway, but I was like, okay, I want to put down some texture first, and that's what I did. So we can see here, let's close up on this. We've got some gesso, and sometimes it's highlighted with the way that I've put the paint on and applied it. And those are some of my favorite spots where you can really see, like, oh, like there's this other element going on here. Down here too. So this is the masonite board. Another part of what I put on there in the composition and for the texture, also creating some balance, is, so this area here, this is raw canvas. So I didn't gesso this canvas really ahead of time. The same thing with this area here. This is canvas. So again, I've kind of balanced them out a bit, and we'll talk more about the composition of that and how that got balanced out. But this is adding to the texture, because from here to here is super different if you touched it, but also the look of it is different. The way that the paint reacts to the different textures is different. So even just going from here to here using this, it's smoother here. It mixes differently on here. Things blend differently. So textures, knowing how they react, or knowing how your paint reacts to the textures, is really important too. Textures can be subtractive as well, so you can be like taking away from something. Like I mentioned, cutting into stuff. I did some scraping up here that is kind of like adding to the texture by taking paint off with like a metal object. There's a lot of different ways I applied paint on here, because some of this was spray paint and there's like splatters. I let some indigo blue fluid acrylic kind of like drip down here. So there's a lot of techniques going on. I did use a brush for it as well, but yeah, talking about the composition, I guess, and looking at the colors and balance and stuff, like I said, it's not, I don't make anything immensely crazy symmetrical. But I mean, I don't feel like this is crazy imbalanced. Like if we just look at colors and where they are, it's like, hey, we've got teal going here. We've got teal up here. So I feel like I've got some on the bottom, I've got some on the top. We've got pink, this Pepto-Bismol pink, as I call it. It's really strong here and here. I've got some here. There's a little bit like in other areas. This really strong blue, it kind of, for me, it's one of my favorite parts about this piece, partly because of the color and the application. We've got some of that blue over here too, because it's kind of needed to balance things out. But when we talk about the composition as a whole, I mean, we can go and look at all the colors and see how they're balanced or not balanced or whatever. Like this orange, there's a lot of it here. There's very few of it anywhere else until you really look. But I still feel like it's not so strong it's pushed back a bit with the layering that it doesn't seem imbalanced, whereas, you know, your eye is kind of going around. This is another thing that I should have mentioned. I'm glad if you're still watching that I'm mentioning it now, is that you don't want to be fixated on one specific point in an abstract piece. You want the viewer to have their eye looking over the whole piece. There's not one thing that is emphasized more so than something else in one area of a painting. Again, like we're talking about elements and principles of design, emphasis is a thing you can use very, very intentionally. And so this huge piece of canvas here, like, especially in person, you can tell, like, oh, there's this shape here. What's that about? You can kind of tell that there's one here too. This is a lot smaller in comparison to this. This is about twice as big. How do I balance that out in my composition? Part of it was just with this. This is so strong. It's the darkest color on here, and it's not blended in a lot. It's very pure. The fact that it cuts down into the piece like that too, it kind of draws your attention over there a bit. But this thing is so big in size that your eye kind of like sees that a little bit too. So I'm gonna put the pictures on, like when I originally finished this piece, which was a couple of years ago, the pictures I took at that time, so you can see it as well. But anyway, this is kind of enough about this piece. This one is a lot newer. This is maybe like 3 weeks old or so, and it was really difficult. There's an art process video about this piece, which I forgot the title already. Oh yeah, Selfish Surrender. So yeah, you can go look that up if you want, because I'm not going to talk about this that much. But like I mentioned, using duct tape sometimes as texture and a way to balance things out a bit. I felt like this is the last thing that I did with the piece to really give it a conclusion. And yeah, but there's all this texture on there ahead of time too. So like there's this thick gesso that's been applied to areas, and then in the process, like adding paint on really thick, adding some finishes and stuff as a medium. There's a lot of movement here. It was really frustrating. This did kind of happen in more than one sitting. I wanted to do something different. I didn't want to work on abstract necessarily. I did this nice background. I was like, this is kind of an abstract piece. It's really nice. But I wanted to use this piece out of the New Yorker, this image. I wanted to incorporate that somehow, and then I started drawing like figures over here, and then it just didn't really work for me at all. This piece was a struggle. I ended up just bringing it back into an abstract piece to resolve it. But I mean, you've got other things in here like line, right? Those lines are adding texture. They're adding like a mood, patterns, rhythm, whatever. If you want, you can deconstruct this into all the elements and principles of design. But yeah, so this is another kind of piece there. Again, with balance. Even though like we're talking about balance in composition and color, like this is only at the top. There's none of that down here. That's completely fine. I still feel this is balanced. I feel like your eye goes up there, but there's other things down here that are bringing your eye back down. Mainly this. It's the only like discernible image of something you can see. So again, it's straddling the line of abstract, but that's there. And you've also got so much motion from these violent lines that I think it helps bring your eye back down here too, because this is so soft, but it's so bright that your eye goes up there. So again, I'll put some pictures of that. This last one is the newest one, so that's why I have it here. Like I said, there's a lot of abstract work that I have at Block 1912 in Edmonton right now. There's a lot of work there that I could talk about, but whatever. There's also on my Facebook page, FK Arts Facebook page, if you go on there, you can see there's like albums dedicated, like Abstracts 2017, Abstracts 2018, Abstracts 2019. I've been working abstractly for a long time, and I still make a lot of abstract work, so you can see that there. Anyway, this was kind of influenced by, I was listening to Bring Me the Horizon's new album, Ammo. So I just put that on. I wanted to listen to it. I listened to it once and I was like, wow, this is really good. I think I want to paint to this. And I actually, it's very rare that I don't take the title right out of the lyrics of the album I'm listening to. But I got the feeling, I guess, out of that album and put that into the title, which is The Softest Bruise Is You. So, The Softest Bruise Is You. Just wanted to double check. That's what I actually named it, because sometimes I forget what I didn't title stuff. But with this one, a lot of people were really drawn to this one, and I'm glad, because I like it. And so, again, like, I just had this idea. My planning portion for this piece was, hey, I'm listening to the new Bring Me Horizon album. I'm really kind of digging it. It's new and fresh to me. It's not something I'm familiar with yet because I haven't listened to it before then. And I was like, you know what? I think I want to paint to this. So a couple days later, I was like, yeah, I'm going to put it on in the studio and I'm going to paint to it. So sometimes I revisit albums a lot because I'm also revisiting themes a lot. So like there's some Perfect Circle albums, 9 Inch Nail albums that I've painted to many times. This was like the first time painting to the new Bring Me the Horizon album. And yeah. So I had some textures on here that I really like. This is like dried up paint from like a jar of paint. It's like crusty paint from the inside that all dried up. That I put on here with gesso. I used gesso as like an adhesive to like put that on there. And then I also like gessoed some spots here. I used another medium as well, which is an acrylic gel medium, impasto medium, and created these really thick spots. And it took a couple days to dry, and it still didn't seem like super fully dry in some areas. Also, I put some of this clear impasto acrylic medium on top as well, and then it dries clear, and you can't necessarily tell, like, I mean, well, you can tell that it's there, hopefully, right? But that adds texture too. So, I mean, part of the process could be putting a finish on a piece as well. This has some finish in some areas, other areas it doesn't. But anyway, the planning portion was just listening to this album, wanting to work with this album. I didn't think of the title until I was kind of in the middle of painting it, and I like reached down and I like wrote it on the wall, which is there's a art process video for this too. It's very short because what I did was I laid down a lot of like ink and water and acrylic and just like water, and then I left it for days. But I just wasn't thinking, I didn't have my helmet with me, I wasn't planning on filming, so I wasn't thinking about it at the time, and I ended up just doing it later, like halfway through the process I like started filming. So it's a very short video. Anyway, so yeah, the painting process, I just started putting down all these inks and everything, and I let it dry. So this is a way that I've separated the process. Usually, like I said, I like to do it in one sitting, but this happened over 2 days. So I came back a couple days later after all this water and ink and stuff had dried, but it created this beautiful foundation. You can see all these layers, and these layers provide implied texture as well. So these kind of things here where the water and ink mixed and then dried and stuff, it's harder to see up here because I've covered it so much with like this black acrylic and this like spray paint that I was using. So yeah, this is made, I should say, with mostly ink, acrylic, and spray paint. And then obviously those physical texture pieces as well. But that's kind of that process for that one. I just wanted, again, if we're talking about composition and balance and stuff, there's like purple, there's this yellow up here it's not like a super strong yellow, but it's there. And then we've got a little bit of yellow, this blue, I mean, it peaks right here, there's some of that, but generally it's more down here. Again, it doesn't have to be symmetrical balancing for it to work. The black is very strong too, right? So we're talking about like optically, where does your eye go? I mean, there's this red that's barely anywhere else. Like there's nothing down here with red. There's some there, this orangey red there. There's greens in here too that kind of are a little bit here, whatever. But I mean, it's like, what's drawing your eye? like for me, this piece, like because this blue is so bright, I think your eye comes here, but then like this black is so strong, your eye ends up getting drawn over here. This is so thick that I like exploring that visually too. So I think your eye does bounce around it a lot, which is good for an abstract piece. That's what you want. Um, so these are just some examples, I guess, like that I can show you because I don't have, like I said, a lot of abstract pieces here. But you can go search them up. Like I said, I've got a lot of pieces on Instagram, but on Facebook they're into albums. So if you go look at the albums, you can look through them just by human figure, just by abstract, depending on the year, just at photography, whatever. So that's that's a big, long instructional thing about how do you make an abstract piece, or how do I make an abstract piece. It could be, you know, I might use different mediums, like this one over here has like some copper leaf in there and stuff and what have you. Sometimes I'm not using spray paint or acrylic, so it all depends, but I mean, again, that's why I broke it down into those three elements that are really important, which are color, texture, and composition, and then the kind of stages of how I would apply those things, of the planning, then the texture, then the actual painting process. And if you're assigning a meaning, you need a title, I think, but that's not necessarily, like when we talked about that. Anyway, I'm going to wrap that up, and then I'm going to start creating an abstract piece. That'll be, you can look for that in the art process and the instructional playlist. I'll put it in both. And yeah, I don't know. I think this is a lot of fun talking about it because it's helping me kind of just refocus a bit. And like I've kind of taught these things in a classroom setting before a little bit, but not so like this is how we make abstracts. It's more of like how do we make art? What is art? Anyway, so it's been good. I'll see you on another time.